Hello everyone, welcome to week 3. Today we're going to talk about inventory. I guess the highest level definition of inventory is um, products that a company is holding on hand that will be used to generate value or revenue in the scope of this discussion. So if you think about it in context of a retailer such as a Walmart, um, the vegetables, the TVs, anything they have on their shelves is going to be inventory. When you look at a manufacturer, it could be the finished goods. It could also be what goes into the finished goods. So just kind of the high level overview of inventory. Um, we want to look at, why do we have inventories? Because the customer usually isn't sitting at the exit of the factory. Um, yeah, you don't pick up your car from the GM plant, you pick it up at the dealer. And in order for the dealer to sell a car, the dealer has to have inventory. So, why hold inventory? Obviously, for economies of scales. So it's a lot easier for the retailer, for the Target or the Walmart to purchase in bulk, and then they can put their profit and sell it to you. So you actually get the lower price by buying through their purchasing power. It does have purchasing advantages. It's obviously cheaper to ship an entire truckload versus a box on UPS. And then manufacturing. So it's easier when you're manufacturing in large volumes. It also helps balance supply and demand. When you look at supply and demand, some of that is going to be seasonality, or speculative. And also it helps maintain the supply sources. So by leveling that out, balancing the supply and demand, you're able to stabilize your supply and you're able to give your suppliers a little bit more predictive forecast. We also can consider that it also buffers against the uncertainty. So when you hold inventory, if you have a run on the product, um, you can always have what is needed for the supplier. And if there is a shortage on the supply side, your inventory can help provide a buffer. A great example of this is going to be COVID-19. If you consider, I know everyone jokes about it, but toilet paper. Companies that held inventory of toilet paper had plenty of toilet paper to sell their customers, and they also had a abundance of um, toilet paper as the suppliers could not keep up in supply. So some factors that influence inventory levels. What's the average inventory? So let's say that I have 100 units for the first 15 days a month in my warehouse, and then they're pulled and shipped to someone else. And I have 50 units the rest of the month. My average inventory is going to be an average of that. Other factors for influence that influence your inventory could be the number of products. You only have so much warehouse space. That warehouse space has to be split amongst everything you carry. So if you carry 10,000 SKUs, you're not going to be able to hold as much of every SKU as you would if you carry 10 SKUs. A great example when you think of how this can be affected, think of the shoe industry. You could buy a men's dress shoe, and it could be in light brown, medium brown, dark brown, and black. Um, and then that same shoe then could have a slip-on and lace variant. So right now you're looking at four, and then at two different variants of slip-on and lace up or tying. So then all of a sudden you're at 8 variants, and then when you consider all the shoe sizes, um, you can see how all those different part numbers will tie up the inventory. You also want to look at how your organization values the service level, how they value their ability to deliver to the customer, your supply chain structure, and then what are the financial implications. So a key thing to remember when we're talking about um, inventory is that it is a use of the organization's financial capital. So we really want to make sure that we're allocating financial resources to inventory that is going to move, inventory that's going to bring value to the organization. So sources of organizational risk. So inventory, as we said earlier, is going to help buffer against organizational risk. So The first one we'll talk about is market risk. So there is demand-based risk within the market. We talked about that. So is there a run on the product? Is there a PPE, for example? We need a PPE, and there really wasn't a market that existed for you and I for PPE. We didn't have a need in our everyday life like we do now. There is also a look at when you look at market risk, there's also there's a competitive risk, there's a consumer risk, and there's a service risk. We also look at a product as a part of as organizational risk. You know, how does the inventory mitigate the risk of our product being at risk? Sales planning and forecasting, and life cycle risk management. So understand the complete risk to the life cycle. By the life cycle, we're talking about what is the life cycle of the product from launch to end of life. Supply risk. How does this fit into the business strategy? Is the supplier introducing risk? Is there instability? I think a unique example of this would be suppliers in China versus suppliers in Germany. There's a lot less uncertainty about Germany and shipments to the U.S. than China and shipments to the U.S. Is there risk in your logistics? Is there risk in your operations? And then furthering supply risk, we want to look at, almost a holistic approach of what is our organizational strategy to risk and how do we avert it. One risk could be having dual sources or outsourcing. It could be carrying financial loss insurance. It could be utilizing two different logistics suppliers. It could be utilizing an external warehouse so you can hold more inventory. So I think that when you look at mitigating risk and using inventory as a way to mitigate risk, you really have to understand what is the financial investment your organization is willing to make into inventory as a method of mitigating risk. So what are some of the risks that are associated with holding inventory? So really the biggest is you're utilizing your financial resources, and there is a financial exposure, especially if the inventory, the products you're inventorying can go bad on the shelf. So obviously if you're inventorying something like a television, it does not have the exposure to risk of a cucumber. However, a cucumber can go bad, but you also need to consider in certain categories that you will be purchasing. A TV in theory does not go bad, but a TV can go out of demand because the technology could be antiquated. Just like a fashion is another good example. Target, Walmart, Macy's, they want to buy the exact right amount of this season's designs because those designs will not be in demand next year. So I think that the way that they look at inventory for blue jeans as compared to dresses could be incredibly different. Blue jeans for the most part are fairly standard. They have a little longer life cycle, whereas dresses maybe have a 1 or 2 year life cycle. Some of the functions of inventory. So inventory is going to allow for protecting ourselves against risk. It's going to help balance our supply and demand. It's going to accommodate the elapsed time between the inventory availability and consumption. So you can know that, if the demand for the product is 100 pieces a day, but the supply is 80 pieces a day, you can build your inventory to cover that gap. The geographical specialization, it will allow us to specialize production across different locations, and we have inventory located as a result of and to support that. The buffering from uncertainty, that is going to be one of the biggest functions of inventory. It's helping us prevent impact by risk. So an inventory policy is going to be the firm's guideline that concerns what do we purchase, what do we manufacture, when do we purchase it, when do we take action, what quantity should the action be taking, how much money are we willing to invest, and where the product should be located. If you look at multinational corporations, um, I guess a good example is, let's say you are a Dick Sporting Goods, and you have huge distribution centers all across the country. You're not going to inventory ski jackets in Florida. You're probably going to inventory them in Denver or um, Washington State or Minnesota, places where people ski. Um, Transversely, you aren't going to inventory the equipment for deep sea fishing in Indiana. You're going to want to keep that close to the coastal regions where it's sold. Um, the firm's policy also can include decisions about which inventory management practices. So it could have the policy could dictate that we're going to use this inventory management practice, and we're going to use that to help us really make sure that our inventory drives value for the organization. Looking at some of the inventory definitions, um, the cycle inventory, that's your base stock. It's a portion of the average inventory that results from replenishment. Order quantity is the amount that we order in order to replenish our inventories. Um, Transit inventory represents the amount that's typically in transit. So if you look at your inventory, you may have 100 units on your shelf and 100 units in transit. So in theory, you have 200 units that you can commit to sale. Obsolete inventory, it's inventory that's out of date. There's not a demand for it. Speculative inventory is inventory that's bought to hedge against currency exchange or to take advantage of a discount. Safety stock is the remainder of inventory in a logistics system that is above your average demand. Inventory carrying cost, when we look at that, it's the expense associated with maintaining the inventory. Inventory expense it's an annual inventory carrying cost multiplied against the average inventory value. So some of the components of the inventory carrying cost are cost of capital. This is specified internally. This is what we value our capital at. Every company is going to value their capital differently. So when you're looking at the valuation of capitals, what would we have made had we invested this capital in a production line or in a new factory or in a new product line? So in other words, let's say our expected cost of capital is 10%. We need to make sure that we're getting that value out of our inventory. We also want to consider taxes on the inventory held in the warehouse. Since taxes are an asset, they are subject to taxes in some states. So when we go back to deciding where you may want to hold inventory, for example, if you're a organization that utilizes a lot of expensive items, so a good example would be if you're making electronics, gold, there's a lot of gold in electronics because of the connectivity. And let's say that you have a manufacturing plant for electronics in Kentucky, and Tennessee does not tax inventory. It might be advantageous to put a warehouse for your gold in Tennessee and only ship a daily shipment of what you're going to use to Kentucky. Insurance, that's a component of cost because you are going to insure your inventory. In theory, if your warehouse was to burn down, you want to be indemnified by an insurance company for all the income you could have earned from that stock. You also want to consider obsolescence. So this goes, grocers and pharmaceutical companies will use this. The deterioration of the product, so you want to understand that. So you may have to assume a risk of, say, 5% you're throwing out. So that's a cost of inventory. And then storage. What is the square footage? What does it cost for the building you're keeping in and the utilities? And even the people that you're utilizing in the storage process. So table 7.2 in the text is going to be have a great example of how you calculate the cost of capital. So I'd encourage you to go in there and look at that. And it breaks down the buckets of cost of capital, taxes, insurance, obsolescence, storage. And it says this is what my inventory carrying cost is based on that firm's particular set of requirements. Once we know our organization's way that they're going to carry inventory, what they're going to allow us to carry, we need to look at the inventory ordering cost components. How do we, what's the order preparation cost, the order transportation, order receipt, material handling? These are all the costs that go into the administration of the order, and this is all part of the cost of managing your inventory. As we transition on from ordering, we want to understand when do we need to order. So the basic reorder formula, if demand and performance are certain, is going to be the average daily demand in units multiplied by the average performance cycle length in days, and that's going to equal our reorder point. If safety stock is needed in that equation, the formula is fairly simple. It's going to be that the reorder point in units equals the average daily demand multiplied by the average performance cycle length in days, and then adding our safety stock. So simply put, if we know that we sell 100 units a day, and we know that it takes 10 days to get 100 units, we know that we need to be ordering accordingly to that. The economic order quantity is the amount that balances the cost of ordering with the cost of maintaining average inventory. It's going to assume that demand and cost are relatively stable for the year, but it does not consider the impact of joint ordering of multiple products. So typically it's best used when for one product at a time. So when you're looking at an EOQ model, there's some assumptions to make. All demand is satisfied. Rate of demand is continuous, it's constant, and we know it. The replenishment performance cycle is constant and known. There's a constant price of the product that is dependent of order, quantity, and time. We have an infinite planning horizon. There's no interaction between multiple items of inventory, so it's not when we sell this, we sell that. It's you do it by one item at a time. You make no assumptions for inventory in transit, and you make no assumption of any limits placed on capital availability. So when we look at some of our uncertainties in inventory management, inventory policy must deal with uncertainty. So the demand uncertainty, when and how much product will the customers order. So we never know, but we can always forecast. We also want to look at the performance cycle uncertainty. So how long will it take to replenish the inventory? How is your supply chain performing? The variation must be considered in both areas to make effective inventory planning decisions. Inventory planning is really one of the most critical parts of the supply chain. We are the stewards of the company's resources, and we want to make sure that we're investing in the right product that's going to bring the right value and really deliver the best ultimate performance for the organization. So as you look through this chapter, understand that inventory management, there is some mathematical logic behind it, and there is a science to calculating your inventory levels. However, the assumptions that go into calculating are often based on sales forecast, and those assumptions are often speculative. So it is the job of the inventory manager to really make sure that they're taking the speculative and utilizing the speculative information as best as they can in order to protect the organization. As you work through the rest of the chapter, as you work through the text, please let me know if you have anything you want to discuss about inventory, if there's anything I can help clarify, or any points of concern. Thank you. Have a great week. Keep up the good work, everyone, and look forward to seeing your submissions and questions and comments in the discussions board.